Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to ride the hype train, and maybe the anti-hype train. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games and movies and television and anime, lots of things over the
books.
time. Books, yeah, exactly. Manga. Anyway, the very first episode of the podcast we ever did was the hype train episode, where we all got on our, we were pulling into the station for the new releases of then, 2015 was it?
Yeah, this is the 3rd year anniversary podcast, so yeah, it would be 2015. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the hype train is just all of the stuff that's coming out that we are hyped for. Hey, free marketing. Good job.
And maybe a little bit anti-hype for, because I think we're going to start out this cast with a discussion of Fallout 76. Since we started out the first hype train, or since first hype train, at least to my memory, centered a lot around Fallout 4. Yeah, and this is the grandson of that game in some way.
Don't talk to me or my son ever again, Mango.
And I think that not only did we fall off of that hype train relatively quickly, I think we there was a couple weeks later we did the hype train starts to derail about how we were disappointed in Fallout 4.
Yeah.
And I think you more than me, but I also think that we're much substantially less hyped for Fallout 76. Is that true for you? It's
yeah,
true for
I
me.
think of myself as not being hyped for Fallout 76, but I also think of myself as being a little bit outside of the mainstream in a way. I don't quite know what the mainstream opinion on Fallout 76 really is, but I have seen a lot of sort of like disillusionment on like Reddit and stuff like that, where people are like, oh, this is just a cash in, or whatever, right? Like, and I can definitely actually empathize with people who, really appreciate that games like Fallout 4 are these big open world RPGs, and we don't get as many of those as we used to, like in the early 2000s, right? I feel like we had tons of these kinds of games, but now we're looking at, we're looking at games like Black Ops or whatever, or whatever it is, right? Where there's a big shift away from that kind of single player content into, like dedicated like multiplayer sorts of content. So I think the proper thing to do is to say, okay, here is something that is using the Fallout 4 engine and kind of skin, right, and applying it to a different genre of game. And so you're taking that sort of like Fallout 4 RPG stuff, and you are making something that is more akin to Fortnite or PUBG, which without necessarily being, a battle royale game, right? But it is still, moving away from that RPG, and it deserves to kind of like get its own judgment on its own merits. So
yeah,
so from that perspective, I think I'm up on Fallout 76. But otherwise, I have very little intention to play that game.
Yeah, I feel like I'm similar to you. Just to comment on what you said about the single-player open-world games, I think a lot of those have been replaced by kind of what I alluded to last week, which is like, open-world single-player games with towers that you do collectibles in.
Yeah, definitely.
With the UB Tower type games. And I do think we have a dearth of kind of the classic RPGs in that sense. I also see this as coming from like the same kind of roots as you suggested for like the battle royale games, and I think that root is in kind of like these open world survival games, right? The DayZ mod for Arma, the DayZ game for Steam, and things in that genre. Even like Minecraft has some of that like same DNA in it. And so I do think it deserves to be judged on its own merits. And I kind of go back and forth. Like, I feel like this, like, if this game had come out when Fallout 4 was supposed to come out, I would have been pre-order on this, right? Like, I think it looks really cool, but I have big reservations about the execution. And so I'm probably going, especially, the one thing that I think is not great is, one of the pre-order bonuses is you get early access, and that all rolls into your regular game, right? You get to just play the game like 2 or 3 days earlier.
I didn't actually know that. That kind of sucks.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And the other thing is there's like, so the thing I am. It's weird to focus on this in particular, but I think it's very relevant just considering the type of game it's supposed to be. Is they're doing a lot of anti kind of griefing stuff, which I understand why you want to do, but I feel like part of the reason you want to play this game is for that kind of like griefing experience. As dumb as that sounds, right? Like you want kind of that rawness, and at the very least, I'm surprised they don't have like basically an option to like turn on hardcore mode or something
or even something just like war mode, like in WoW, where the rules are harsher.
Yeah, and I think that actually turned a lot of people off of the game because I think part of the core fantasy of the Fallout universe is kind of like, either being a bastard or being the guy that stands up. Like I feel like people want to be the raiders at some level.
Yeah, no, I super feel that. And I think that in a certain sense, I kind of wished, like I like a version of Fallout 76 that plays into that a little bit more. In the same way that, like, what's a good way to put this? Okay, so this is we're gonna have to take a walk around the block for this metaphor.
Okay,
it's choice. Okay, so imagine Total War Warhammer 2, right? But imagine a version of Total War Warhammer 2 where all of the factions are played by player characters, right? So it's not just like a co-op game or whatever, right? But it is a truly, right, all of the factions on the board, like outside of the impracticality of it, right?
Right.
If I'm playing greenskins, right, I am encouraged to raid, and I'm encouraged to sack and pillage settlements and raze them to the ground or whatever, because like I am not a success, because the mechanics of the game are such that I am not a successful I'm not a successful faction of the greenskins if I'm not taking advantage of those, because the greenskins get huge benefits to raiding, right? And they need to keep their like fight bar up or whatever, right? And I think in a certain sense Fallout 76 wants something similar, right? Which is that like you want certain kinds of gameplay that do encourage you to behave a little less than we might say is civilly proper. Yeah, it's definitely not civil, right? Like, yeah. And so like I don't know if they probably don't have like a factions thing or anything like that, right? Like, haven't they said that there's not there aren't like NPCs or whatever, and that's kind of fine, right? But the idea that there are certain things that you can do in order to screw over other players because somebody wants to essentially LARP as like the local raider group that just attacks everybody, right? Like, why not? Why would you not have that in your game? That sounds great to me.
Yeah, and like I said, I think there's, if you don't want to deal with that, of course, having the ability to say like, please no, I would just kind of like to play my Fallout Minecraft in my little corner. I think that's fine too.
Yeah.
I think I'm probably just gonna sit back and see what people say about it, and maybe get into it later.
Yeah, I am excited to see what people say about it. I will say that people at my work are pretty hyped about it, and they talk about, like it is kind of the gravitational force this winter that all of their decisions are orbiting around, right? Like, ooh, will I have time for Red Dead? Can I beat Red Dead 2 before Fallout comes out, etc., sort of stuff. So,
yeah, no, like on paper, this is a game that I should be like creaming my pants for.
Yeah,
and I'm not, and I don't know. So something that goes along with this is very tangential, but I think it's worth exploring. Is I think this is the first game that you can't get through Steam. You have to use the Bethesda storefront for it.
Oh, gross! No way! Wow, that sucks.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously like you see a bunch of companies do it, especially like kind of like the bigger companies that have these publishing arms trying to recapture. I think it's like 30% that Steam takes. So I can't say I blame them from like a business angle, but it's just like, I think it's another barrier.
Yeah.
I feel like...
I mean, even like Ubisoft has its own storefront, but they still sell everything through Steam.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's just such a huge piece of the market share. Like, boy, did the chance that I buy Fallout 76 just fall off a fucking cliff, right? Because, like, if Fallout 76 isn't a game that I'm going to buy up front for $60, and I do have to say that, man, $60 is a tough, like, hurdle to jump, I think. for a game like that. But it also means that it's not going to like pop up on my like Steam sale, 6 months down the line.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Like 30% off or whatever, and I'm like, oh, hey, maybe I'll buy Fallout 76, play it for $40, right? Like I know some other people have gotten into it in the same way that I've bought games like Borderlands or like whatever else,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That I only picked up kind of like later in its life cycle because I saw it on Steam or whatever. So wow, that is risky. Capital R risky.
Yeah, and I feel like if they're gonna take the chance, it's gonna be with a Fallout title, right?
Yeah.
I feel like this is like their best option, right? Because it's a big enough title that it will convince people to do it, but it's also like far enough off the main, it's a little bit off the beaten path, so that if it fails miserably, they can put like, Elder Scrolls 6 back on the Steam store.
I wouldn't be surprised if they delayed it by a bit, where it's like, okay, for the first 3 months of this thing's life cycle, you can only buy it through the Bethesda store, so you get as much of that kind of like upfront cash in as possible, and then you back put it in onto Steam as a platform and give everybody a code or something like that puts it in their Steam library. That would not entirely surprise me.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, I don't know, I think both you and me don't really feel, and like, I feel like we both feel this kind of way about, like, like Origin or, I guess the UB launcher is the only other good thing I can say about it is, like, it feels kind of weird and, like, why would I bother? But we don't really have a lot of problem with the BattleNet launcher.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. I love the BattleNet like launcher and system, to be honest with you. I like being able to kind of like see and interact with people across game types, right? Where like I'm typing to people who are typing back to me from Heroes of the Storm or something along those kinds of lines. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like Battle.net is it was never on Steam. They've never done anything with Steam. So it has kind of, and it's been around for, 10 years at this point.
Yeah.
So I feel like it is kind of like the perfect alternative in a lot of ways to kind of what Steam has ended up being.
And I don't have a problem with like the good old games Galaxy, either, just because it's kind of like it's like a pure competitor to Steam, right? It's not like exclusive platform. It's interesting.
Yeah, I also don't mind things that just pop over Steam codes. I buy Steam codes off of Humble Bundle sometimes, and stuff like that. So I think being able to use Steam codes in order to have it be your platform form of choice, but not necessarily, you're getting everything through there, is kind of fine. And I also think that at the end of the day, Valve doesn't really mind that, because I am still buying a whole bunch of shit off of Steam, right? Plenty of stuff that I'm not, that I'm not making use of, right? Like Vermintide 2 or whatever else. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, as far as continuing the hype train, I think this is going to be the most obvious hype that I am hyped by. But have you seen the trailer for Curse of the Vampire Coast?
Yeah, no, it looks really cool.
So Curse of the Vampire Coast, for everybody who doesn't know, is the new campaign pack for Total War Warhammer 2. It's coming out in about a month. It is zombie pirates, like, oh man, there's not a lot else to say about it besides it is a bunch of vampires who decided to become fucking pirates, and obviously
is that like a thing? Is that a thing in the lore? Like, is there like a...
So, interestingly enough, a lot of this stuff in the lore is like goofs in a lot of ways, right? They have introduced lore to the Warhammer universe, right? Like, Warhammer is very centered around the old world and the Empire and stuff like that, right? But with the introduction of Dark Elves, High Elves, right? Like, the Lizardmen kind of over on the... like that side of the world, in order to make it not so homogenous, where you just kind of go, oh, well, Lustria is just all lizard men, right? They had like a bunch of small stuff in there just to kind of like break up the monotony, and the Vampire Coast is kind of like the breakout group of that. Another version of this, by the way, are a group of Norska, the Viking raiders, who are in Lustria. They like sailed to Lustria and decided to just hang out there. And they're also represented in Total War. But anyway, so the idea is, so it was basically a group of, it's like a group of vampires that left Sylvania and resettled, and then the head vampire has these things called black skulls that he like puts some of his power in, and he can hand it off to his captains, and they can like become, they can like command these like undead like pirate fleets or whatever. But so the lore of it is interesting, but I'm also really excited to see these kinds of mechanics. I have been perpetually impressed with how the Creative Assembly team introduced new factions over time. The very first faction, the Beastmen, was pretty boring, right? And then they went through, even the very, very first faction is Warriors of Chaos, right? But they went through and they kept kind of adding factions, and over time they got better and better at it, right? The Wood Elves are a very tall race where they can settle any land outside of their forest, but they can only settle it at the very basic bottom tier. So you have to build a very tall empire in Athaloran in order to, be successful or whatever. And then over time, you have like Skaven and the Skaven corruption that hurts both you and your enemies or whatever. And up until the Tomb Kings, who don't pay recruitment, right? You have to spread out and build these huge, crazy pyramids in order to like make your army the best that it very much can be. And so I think that the idea of tooling around in a big ass pirate ship and raiding and sacking and pillaging with my giant hermit crab siege monsters is just like the coolest idea, that both from a flavor perspective and from a mechanics perspective, I'm really excited to see what they do.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. I might even check it out, even though I don't play the game nearly as much as you do.
Yeah, I feel like it'll be so the other cool part about it is that they have four different legendary lords, right? 4 legendary lords always come with each of the different groups. And the 4 legendary lords are all really different this time around, which I like a lot. The core guy is named Luther Harkon, and his whole thing is that he's like cursed, because he was a wizard, but then like the winds of magic got like ripped from him, and it like basically like cursed him, and it like ripped his mind in half or whatever. And so his whole thing is about like trying to get rid of this curse and put his mind back together. Noctilus is a vampire lord who teleported himself to like this place called the Galleon's Graveyard, where there are all of these ships that like it's like a shipwreck cove kind of place or whatever. And so he raises these sunken warships with vampire crews and goes out and like terrorizes places and wants to conquer and be this admiral or whatever. One of them is a human, where she is like a human and she's rumored to be the daughter of the sea god Manan or whatever, but she has one of Luther Harkon's black skulls, I think, which allows her to, control the vampire crews or whatever. But she's just like a regular old fucking like sack and pillaging pirate who just wants like gold and shit. And then the last one is a court singer from Bretonia who sank beneath the waves and then like became a siren, like an undead ghost siren or whatever. And so she leads a faction of drowned soldiers and sailors and can summon like ghost Bretonian knights and stuff like that. And just like all of those things are so much more different compared to the way that I might view, right? Like what's the difference between, I don't know, the
Carl and whoever else is in the Empire.
Carl Franz and Balthazar Gelt or whatever, right? So I think I've said this on the cast before, but I just want to reiterate this stance. I think if you want to look at DLC done right, you want to look at Creative Assembly and Total War, right? This is also coming with a free LC. All of their DLC packs come with baseline free LC packs, probably a Lord or a unit or some regiments of renown or something kind of along those lines. It's coming with a free upgrade of essentially a rework of the old Vampire Counts faction from Total War Warhammer 1. So, I don't know. I feel like these guys really have their heads on their shoulders, and I will grant all the free marketing that I possibly can.
Yeah, well, I think I'm just gonna kind of continue on this epic grand strategy expansion hype train, because Holy Fury comes out on November 13th. New piece of CK2.
Interesting. Yeah, you've been playing a lot of CK2.
Yeah, like, this might be the only time I buy the DLC on release, just because we're playing it so much. Although that might fall off soon, but, there's enough time to figure out if that's going to be the case. We actually tried playing, there's, like, a mod for CK2 called, like, Geheimnichtstalicht or something like that. It's a Warhammer mod.
Okay.
And it actually kind of maps pretty well. We played Greenskins for, like, about 15 minutes before it crashed on all of us. But they basically play like pagans. But that's the thing I'm kind of excited about for Holy Fury. Is one, there's, it also gets a lot of like free stuff for the base game with it, right? Like, this is a criticism you hear about Paradox, right? Like, if you bought all of CK2 at full price, it'd be like probably close to $1,000 at this point.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's like just cosmetic, right? Like, you don't have to get the unit packs, and it goes on sale all the time for like deep discounts. So I don't think it's too bad. Hell, like 6 months ago, this is why we're playing it now, is because like 6 months ago, if you downloaded it, you got the thing for free. Also, when you're playing multiplayer, only one person has to have all the DLC, right? Like, I usually run our games because I have nearly everything, and everybody can play in it, which I think is awesome. That's the thing they didn't have to do, and it's great. Multiplayer isn't the greatest. There's some desyncing issues, but kudos to them for that kind of stuff. And so Holy Fury gives more options to pagans who reform instead of convert, which I think is really cool. We've played a couple of pagan games, and my move usually, because I like being weird, is to like marry somebody from one of the Eastern faiths, convert, and then turn into a Merchant Republic. Kind of do that. What's the like the Seven Seas Nordic group?
Oh yeah. Sure.
Like do that kind of thing, but it's usually like the last game we played, I converted to Islam and did that, and so
that's funny. I mean, it's funny because in Europa Universalis, it's the opposite. If you ever play one of the other like research group types, you always want to Westernize. Because it gives you huge bonuses to your science, which, to be honest, I always felt was a little bit racist, and then they ended up getting rid of that because it was just not a very great mechanic. It didn't really have anything to do with racism or anything like that. But yeah, like, so if you started a game as like, Apache or the Aztecs, or even like is like the Ottomans or something like that, you were always kind of incentivized to end up westernizing, because Western, like the Western Research Group is gives you the biggest bonus you can get to your research.
Yeah, and to be fair, like CK2 has that. Basically, if you're pagan, you're incentivized to either go feudal or go Merchant Republic, do something, just because, and that's not like actually a hard mechanic. It's just that, the way because the game actually weirdly revolves around inheritance laws, you need to be able to get yourself an inheritance structure where you don't lose everything to your kids. That's where you have things like, more than once, X has been had said to us, like, can you guys like plot to kill my son, like the bad son? That way.
Oh my god, I super understand that. Wow, yeah.
Yeah. But I expect much more of that. I'm not super deep on the details about Holy Fury, but I'm just always excited for more, right? Like,
yeah,
more ways to play and more ways to do stuff like that. I figured I'd throw that in there on top of your hype for.
Yeah, I mean, to keep this
War.
rolling just inside of the Paradox House, this is what I expected you to say. Is Imperator Rome,
Right,
which I know
forgot
nothing
about
about. We have no information. There's nothing to say about it besides the fact that Paradox is a great studio. They've been making great grand strategy games for a long time, and I think them making a Rome grand strategy game is awesome, and I'm excited to see it. I want to say more stuff about it, but I don't have any more stuff to say because I don't know what else is.
I've got a little because I've been vaguely following the developer diaries, not like super hardcore.
Oh, okay.
But the thing that stuck out, like, there's a lot of like nitty gritty stuff in there that I don't think is good to get into because I don't even really understand it. It's like, and this is how slave pops work. And
Yeah, even as somebody who has like an extremely thorough understanding of Europa Universalis and even like Stellaris or whatever, I find those dev diaries to be tough to parse.
Yeah. But the one thing I do want to talk about is something, again, that friend of the cast X was talking about. It's like, oh, it's only going to be like Europe, right? It's going to be essentially, it looks like it's going to be essentially the same map as CK2 in terms of scope, but it looks like the scale is going to be a lot bigger. Like, one of the things they said was that, like, take the island of Sicily, instead of being like provinces as like the base unit, it's going to be cities or like as the base region.
Okay.
And like Sicily in, I think CK2 is 2 or 3, in EU4 it's 2 or 3, but the scales or the scope is obviously a lot larger because you've got the whole world. Apparently an Imperator is going to be like 38.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And maybe it's a little bit.
That is awesome though.
Yeah. Maybe it's going to be a little bit denser around Italy because, it's Rome.
Yeah.
And maybe it won't be that dense on the, like, in like Britannia or whatever. If you like the impression that I got from reading the dev diary, it's going to be the scope of CK2, but the scale of like EU4, which I think would be really interesting.
So I have heard that. I have heard that specifically, that they said that the map for Imperator is about the same size as any of the other grand strategy maps that are the whole world, right? So that makes a lot of sense. That's nuts. That is nuts.
Yeah. But I am very hyped for that game as well. But you're right. There's not much more to say about it. Did you have another one you wanted to talk about?
Just to finish off this grand strategy kick, I am also obviously excited about Total War 3 Kingdoms. I'm really interested to see the difference between a historical mode and a romantics mode, because that's the way that they've kind of been framing the whole game, right? Like, if you want to sort of follow the, like, almost like the wuxia history, right? And like the idea being like almost a translation of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms itself, you choose this romance mode, which has which kind of inherits certain things from like Warhammer, right? Where you have like individual actors on the battlefield who are powerful enough to take on an entire unit themselves or whatever. Whereas historical mode, it looks a lot more like Total War Warhammer, Total War Rome or Total War Shogun, where like your general gets a free unit of incredibly powerful guys, right? In Rome, it was Praetorian Guard, who were like the strongest unit. Or in Shogun, right, it is like these master samurai. But they like the unit themselves, like the general themselves, aren't incredibly overpowered or whatever. But I also think the idea that like having not just a general but like lieutenants on the battlefield and ordering around your lieutenants is kind of how you order around your units is a really interesting change. And this is something we talked a lot about during E3 because it came out during, like, a lot of information about it kind of came out during them. But yep, it's coming out in the first quarter of 2019, so I am obviously super excited to see what they come up with.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens with it, because I think maybe the fear is that one of the modes is obviously going to be like a second-class citizen.
Yeah. Well, everybody is saying that about the historical mode. Specifically because the historical mode hasn't been displayed. They've displayed, I think, only stuff from the romantics mode so far, which I kind of understand to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I think just kind of like in concept, it's hard for the historical mode to feel like anything but the romantic mode with like features stripped out. Like I don't know how you can add complexity. Like you can add complexity to historical mode that wouldn't also fit in with the romantic mode stuff, and so like why you wouldn't just have those mechanics in both modes, if that makes sense.
Right.
So we'll see though. Like we said, the creative does good work. So if anybody can do it, I could say it's I would see it being them. All right. I guess moving on a little bit. To finally get out of the grand strategy genre.
Yeah, for real.
Something I'm super actually hyped for is Devil May Cry 5. And I want to say that like maybe like 50 to 60% of this hype is because Pull My Devil Trigger, which is like the battle theme for Nero, is like stuck in my head constantly. It's such a trashy song, but I love it so much. It's also got a great cover by Little V Mills. You can check them both out on what's it called, on Spotify, or on YouTube, I'm sure. But it's I was never super into the character action game genre, but I started getting more and more into it, probably in large part due to I watched a lot of Super Best Friends play. They're a great Let's Play channel. I highly encourage all of you to go watch them if you want to see goofy Let's Plays. Like I really started to get into it around Wonderful 101 for the fucking Wii U, which is like the weirdest game. But I realized that it kind of like feeds a lot into stuff I like, which is like it's not necessarily about getting it done, but it's about getting it done stylishly, right? Like you're not good at Devil May Cry if you finish the game. You're good at Devil May Cry if you get it done with S's, right? On like the hardest difficulty, and that kind of thing where you're encouraged to kind of take non-optimal strategies to kind of be more stylish, I think is really neat. And this game looks very stylish. It also looks a little bit more approachable than say, some of the older games which were kind of very hardcore. The fist mechanics look neat. Like I said, the music mechanics look neat. My favorite thing I saw was they like right around the time, I think it was like Tokyo Game Show, or maybe it was the one in Germany, I forget which, they released some details about it, and like the same day that that everybody was got their hands on it, they released a statement, or not a statement, but it was like just kind of like a preview thing saying that like the better you play, like as your style rank goes up, the more the music will fill in, right? To you'll just kind of have the backing beat, and then the music will fill in, and then at the top levels you'll get the vocals in, right? And somebody tweeted, wait until we see the articles where the journalists say that the music isn't as good in this game because they're not good enough to get the full chorus, and then like literally like an hour later the first article is dropped. It's like, this game, the game seems to lack the musical punch of like the DMC Devil May Cry. Everybody laughed for a while, which I just think is hilarious, but I'm definitely excited for this kind of the kind of goofiness in these games. I shared with you last week. I'll link it in the description. I'll write it down. The line from DMC1, I should have been the one to turn your dark soul to light. Like,
yeah, I love that clip. Because he's so like, I don't know how you can be, God, like, I don't know how you can be out of tune when you're not singing. But like, that's what it sounds like. Yeah. It sounds like he's really off key.
Yeah. Oh man, it's like just riddled with such goofiness. Like I said, go watch. The Super Best Friends are playing through most of the series. They skip 2 because nobody likes 2. But I definitely recommend going and watching it. Apparently, in 3 is where Virgil is introduced. Virgil is Dante's twin, and he's like the evil twin.
Sure,
he's actually kind of like an archetype on his own. You call people the Virgil now. But apparently his voice is kind of iconic, but like the voice actor has trouble replicating it because the reason he sounds the way he does is because the guy had a cold when he was recording all the lines. So he's got this like really nasally sound that doesn't that isn't as consistent in the later games. I don't know. I'm just super hyped for this game. It looks really stylish. It looks really pretty, and it sounds really good. So that's like in March.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, so outside of this sphere of video games, what are you hyped for?
Um, outside of video games. All right, so movies is probably the one to jump to there. Um, and the one I think I'm really looking forward to Enter the Spider-Verse, I think. And that's mostly actually off of the trailer I saw on Venom. I was kind of like on it, but the post credit scene on Venom was a trailer for Enter the Spider-Verse. Um and it actually looks really cool. It looks really like I was impressed with kind of the style when I saw like the short trailers, but like seeing it for a while, it really works and it looks really good. Um, and the little kind of story beats we got have got me wrapped up in that. So Enter the Spider-Verse is probably the biggest thing. What about you?
Do I even have to say it, ladies and gentlemen? There's an Aquaman movie coming out. They released a 5-minute trailer, which I actually kind of think is sort of neat, because typically you get 3 trailers, right? Like one way out in advance, and then kind of 2 beforehand that are like meant to play in front of movies, right? And they didn't do that with Aquaman. They did like the first trailer, which came out, in San Diego Comic-Con, and then they did the second trailer, 2 or 3 months beforehand, 2 months beforehand, and it kind of smushed those last 2. Typically you get 2 3-minute trailers, and they smushed that together to get like 1 5-minute trailer. And so, yeah, I obviously I'm hyped for Aquaman. Obviously. But besides the obvious stuff, I was actually looking at movies coming out, and I was a little bit surprised to see that I wasn't incredibly hyped to see too much of the other stuff coming out. Like by the end of the year. Right, like Bumblebee or whatever, right? Even Enter the Spider-Verse, which I have had the opposite experience, which is the different trailers have kind of sent me against the movie to a certain extent. I was very excited to see Miles Morales. I remember when Miles Morales was first introduced. He was introduced in the pages of Ultimate Spider-Man, which has always been my favorite comic book iteration of Spider-Man. And stuff like that. And so I was like, oh, this is cool. Like Miles gets his own movie, doing his own sort of stuff. Miles has an interesting story with his own kind of villains and cast of characters, and the kind of like unspoken relationship that he has with Peter Parker, who died in that series, is like really like neat and cool. But now it seems to be more of like an ensemble movie about all of them, right? Like the Enter the Spider-Verse stuff is that it is about all these different Spider people, and you have Spider Gwen, and you have Spider Ham, who sounds hilarious, by the way. Big fan of John Mulaney or whatever. So I guess to a certain extent my stock has fallen a little bit when it comes to Enter the Spider-Verse. But yeah, and then in the beginning of next year, there's a couple of things that I'm hyped for. Obviously Shazam, right? I'm interested by Captain Marvel, although that first trailer was bad and boring. Did we talk about that trailer on the cast?
I don't know if we did.
Yeah, because you thought it was boring too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if we talked about it, we obviously forgot about it because the trailer was so forgettable.
Yeah, that trailer was so forgettable. Yeah, and just bad. I just think it was very bad.
One of the hot takes I saw on Twitter was like, the best thing about that trailer was the blockbuster, which is a problem.
That's true. That's what everybody referenced in that trailer, was like the blockbuster in like the first 2 seconds of it. And there, there's some controversy, right? Like the fucking smile. Did you see the smile thing?
No.
Yeah, so it was like a controversy because in reacting to the trailer, a number of critics were kind of like, "Oh, she looks so, Brie Olsen, right? Looks so mean. Like, geez, can't she like smile or whatever?" Which kind of got interpreted along like the sort of sexist implications or whatever. Yeah. But having seen kind of both sides of that and remembering the context around fucking Superman in Man of Steel, Batman v Superman or whatever, I think it is more kind of along those lines. And I think it's a dumb criticism in the same way that I think it's a dumb criticism for Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, or whatever else kind of thing. But yeah, it was like a 20-second Twitter controversy.
A lot of those.
Yeah, very dumb, very stupid.
Yeah, So the one that I'm excited about early in 2019 is Hellboy, just because I've been meaning to get around to read some of those comics because I really love the Guillermo del Toro movies. But apparently they're not exactly what the comic book author really wanted out of them, or at least how he envisioned kind of like his world outs, which I think is a little bit darker, a little bit less fantastic, and a little bit more darker and horror-y. And the Hellboy is the sheriff from Stranger Things, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I think he's a good match for kind of like the body, like I can see it is basically what I mean, right? Like, and so I'm excited to see what they do with that, and maybe they'll convince me to finally go buy and read some Hellboy comics. Have you read any Hellboy?
Yeah, I've actually read a bunch of Hellboy. And I think Hellboy is great. I think Hellboy is actually kind of uniquely great from a standpoint of movie making because there's not a lot of continuity, which I think is kind of like just neat. But yeah. One other movie I will say early in 2019 that I am also kind of hyped for is the Lego Movie 2. I am sad that the Lego Movie 2 is not being directed by my boys Phil Lord and Chris Miller, but they are still producing the project, obviously. So and it is set off of like the kind of the world and the style and everything that they created. So I have a certain amount of faith, and I'm really excited to sort of see what that comes out with. Because God, like the Lego Movie is such a good movie.
I need to see it. I saw Lego Batman, which I really like.
Wait, you never saw the original Lego Movie?
I never got around to it. No.
Oh my God, you're gonna love it. It's like the perfect movie for you.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, because like Chris Pratt is doing like his Chris Prattiest, Chris Pratt thing, and but like it's also like sincere but tongue in cheek at the same time. It's a whole thing. So yeah.
Yeah. Kind of in the line of sequels for children. This is an anti-hype one, but I am not really that hyped for the Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet or whatever it is.
I've been very disappointed by the trailers for that one.
Yeah, because it took a lot of what made the first one special, it felt like, which is kind of like a lot of the kind of video gamey stuff. The stuff that kind of endeared it to us kind of just on its face, right? That it was finally a movie kind of embracing kind of like the video games as an aspect of the culture that is part of so many kids' lives these days, and to kind of bowdlerized it and put it into like this generic internet movie. I feel like I get flat. I never saw the Emoji Movie, but it like the trailers feel similar to me.
Oh yeah, I have the I have like weird. I get this like late stage capitalism kind of like reaction to it. You know what I mean? Where it feels like the movie is like, brands! Don't you love brands? Don't you love our brands? Right? Like, buy merchandise from the Disney store at disney.go.com, right? Like that's like the feeling I get out of the movie.
Yeah,
and I don't want to be, I really hate that kind of interaction with like movies and film and stuff, because I do think that this stuff is like legitimately art, and I think that Marxist kind of critiques along those lines are frankly very boring and very not fun, and they don't take any kind of they're just like super cynical, and they basically say that you can't have a real emotional reaction with something along these kinds of lines. But if there is anything that embodies like the sort of kind of like depravity of like the Wendy's Twitter account or something like that, it feels like Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet is the spiritual successor. It's that in movie form.
Yeah, I think the moment that really killed it for me was when they're like talking to the search engine, and she's like, "I want to go to a cool place." It's like, "Oh, you gotta go to Disney then." It's
yeah, I know.
Shoot me.
I know. I just wanted to die. I was like, oh, why are you doing this to me?
But yeah, it's I don't know what else is there to be hype about. I still got some more video game stuff, right? Like there's Sekiro. Are you a big Dark Souls guy?
I'm not a big Dark Souls. I've never played because all of the Dark Souls games came out on consoles that I didn't have, and then I got on my like big computer and I never really got into it because it was like Dark Souls 3 or whatever. I imagine that I would be interested / hyped for Dark Souls, though I do hate the kind of like get good bullshit that comes with it. You know what I mean?
Huh. Explain that actually. I'm curious. But
it's sort of like the Rick and Morty fan base ruining Rick and Morty, if that makes sense.
Okay,
right?
yeah,
like,
yeah. I feel
Rick
that.
and Morty is a good show. I like the show or whatever. I just think that all of the fans I actually don't know how much I like the show, but if like when I look at Rick and Morty, I see a certain product and I say, "Oh, that's cool. Like that's really neat and interesting." And I'm sure that a very similar thing would happen with like Dark Souls, but I dislike the way that people talk about and around Dark Souls in the sense of like Dark Souls is there for me to, you know, I don't know, like style on you because I completed it at some difficulty level and you need to get good. And if you can't complete it at that difficulty level, you're, you know, a piece of shit or whatever. Just like, I don't know. I hate all of that kind of discussion around the game.
Well, so I think that that's a little bit unfair because I think that this is the core of it, right? Dark Souls doesn't have difficulty levels, and I think there's been like a lot of like there's been some call from some portion of the population to like make an easy mode for Dark Souls, and you know, obviously there are people who are like, haha, get good, you scrub, you know, learn to play video games, especially when it's like a journalist doing it, right? There's always that cadre of people who are going to be like, journalists can't even play these games. But I do think that there's something to be said for, you know, the difficulty, like I'm kind of a believer that each game has a difficulty it's meant to be played at, and that kind of expresses the artistry of the game in like its most true way. And Dark Souls achieves that by not like letting you escape that. And it's meant to be a very punishing and difficult and kind of in some ways infuriating game. But that I think plays into what it wants you to feel about the world, what it wants you to feel about the story. And so while I definitely take your point, there are definitely people out there who just like to be shitters about it. And, you know, I think the other side of this coin too is like, you know, everybody and their brother calling whatever it is the Dark Souls of X.
Yeah,
right?
that's like, that is also a piece of it. I hate it when somebody is like, this is the Dark Souls of, you know, 2D platformers. This is the Dark Souls of Pokemon. And it's like, God, go away. Just, nobody likes you, okay?
Yeah. There's a great Twitter account that I'll link. It's like everything is Dark Souls. It just like farms quotes about that. But it's Sekiro to get back to the point, right?
Yeah, Sekiro.
Yeah, is going to be
the Dark Souls of something. Is that what it is?
Well, if it's by FromSoft, right? Like Bloodborne, they're called Soulsborne games now, so I'm sure they'll be called like Seki Soulsborns by the end of like the year, or they'll just call Sekiro a Soulsborne game, and I think that, or I'm excited for it because it looks like it's different enough from Dark Souls. It kind of embracing some of the elements that made Bloodborne a lot of people's favorites in kind of the genre, which is kind of like rewarding a more aggressive play style and a little bit less slow and plotting than Dark Souls can get, as well as some cool kind of stuff that you can do with like your side, like your arm attachments, right? Like the story is that you've lost an arm and you've got like a grappling hook in there and you've got like a shield fan and like maybe like a blowtorch or something. I think that all looks very cool. And you know, I'm also a big fan of Neo, which was the I forget what the developer's name was, but it's a Souls type game in feudal Japan. This is you actually play a historical figure. I forget what his name was, but he's basically an Englishman that goes to that goes to Japan to save the world or something. There's some mystical plot that kind of like half mirrors the historical plot. And I thought that was probably the best non FromSoft Souls game there is. It also has some really neat elements, like it's basically like a Diablo style looting system, which I thought was really cool and a really interesting enhancement of kind of the Soulsborne formula. And Neo 2 comes out, just kind of like throw that on the pile. That's coming out. I don't know when. And I'm a little bit afraid that maybe Sekiro's gonna kill Neo, which would disappoint me. But I think there's enough room for multiple games in the genre, and even multiple games in kind of like the set in feudal Japan genre. So
yeah.
But yeah, Sekiro, that also comes out in March. March is going to be a busy month for me, I think, in terms of game releases. You got anything else you want to talk about?
I'm trying to think of TV. I'm trying to think of like TV that I'm hyped for. I don't
Boku no Hero Academia season 4.
Yeah. So how does that work with anime? Is it a year? Is it 6 months? Is it?
So BNHA is big enough that like it might be in the spring. Like I think this arc or this run went spring through summer, and it is like the biggest thing right now. So I'm sure. You know what? Let me go see if they've got any information on it, because I'm sure it's definitely coming. I don't know if there's any information on it. It's confirmed, right? Like, but yeah, okay. I don't think there's any information on it. Yeah. I think there's some discussion about whether like at some point this happens to all the popular anime where like the anime starts coming out faster than the manga, or the manga author writes the manga.
Yeah.
So eventually it catches up, and they have to decide whether they do filler or they just put it off. We'll see. But I'm sure that's coming out. I can't believe it's not coming out sometime next year. Although it did take us like 3 or 4 years to get a second season of Attack on Titan. But yeah,
because I feel like I watch a lot of TV, but I don't know like what comes out sort of like when. Like I know Mindhunter season 2. Mindhunter was my favorite TV show of last year, and Mindhunter season 2 it has filmed in 2018, but I think it probably comes out somewhere in 2019. I know that there is a second season. Netflix like immediately picked it up for another season. But the big one is obviously Young Justice. Holy shit! Yeah, Young Justice.
Right, we were talking about that. Yeah.
Is coming out in early 2019 at some point, bringing back a lot of like the big name heavy hitter writers. It is insane to me that they were able to kind of like piece that project back together. 6 years after 6 years after the fact. Just because that's actually a little bit too long. It had to be a little bit less than that. Maybe it was only like 5 years or something. But Greg Weisman went on to do his own thing. Though apparently, I guess he didn't like his time at Disney because he was only there for one season of Star Wars Rebels. I think the different voice actors. I mean, Carrie Payton is on The Walking Dead, which is the biggest and also like fucking worst show ever. And so I'm surprised they were able to get him into the studio. Plus he's on Teen Titans Go. So the guy who voices Aqualad also voices Cyborg in the from the original Teen Titans, and then he went to Aqualad, and then in Teen Titans Go he voices Cyborg again because it's the same voice cast. Which is actually why, because you've seen the Serious episode, right? Let's Get Serious. Where they meet Aqualad and the Young Justice team in Teen Titans Go. Oh my god, it's the best episode ever.
Yeah, I don't think I've.
I highly recommend everyone go try and find the episode Let's Get Serious from Teen Titans Go, because it is literally it's one of those episodes where they're kind of like trolling the haters, because they're goofing around. And Aqualad from Young Justice shows up, and it's the same voice actor, right? So, it's easy to kind of like mix and match or whatever. But Aqualad from Young Justice shows up and he's like, you guys aren't serious. You don't take anything seriously. It's all jokes and burgers and burritos, right? Like, we're serious heroes who, like, save the day, and you should feel bad. And so the Teen Titans try and become serious, and there's hijinks. It's great.
That sounds like Teen Titans Go.
It does, like, yeah, I guess it does. And one of the other interesting things about Young Justice is that the difference between Season 1 and Season 2 was actually really drastic. Young Justice Season 1 was centered around, like these 6 characters, kind of like 8 by the end of the season, but 2 of them come in at the very end, so it doesn't really count. It centers around like these 6 characters, and then there's a 5-year time jump, right? And these kids they're teenagers, right? And so after the 5-year time jump, then they're doing... they are working with like a new kind of generation of like the Teen Titans, so to speak. And Superboy and Miss Martian have kind of like aged out. Some of them have moved on into the Justice League, like Zatanna becomes a member of the Justice League or whatever. Robin becomes Nightwing, and there's a new Robin sort of thing. And so, like, I am interested. What we have seen so far of Young Justice Season 3 suggests that it is not going to be like another huge time jump, that they're going to stick in that kind of 5 years later like time zone. But oh boy, God, that show is so good. I'm very excited for you to like watch it. Like apropos of nothing, keep yourself not spoiled, because there is some good shit in there. It is really good.
Yeah, I'll have to give that a watch. We'll have to discuss it. Are you excited for CW's Arrow, which premieres on October 15th?
I have fallen off of Arrow. I watched 4 seasons of Arrow, and I liked actually all of it, but just at some point I stopped watching it.
Garrick?
For some. I stopped watching it for some reason, and I got kind of onto other stuff. Yeah. I would have added, have you ever watched Nick Kroll's animated show on Netflix called Big Mouth? Everybody hates that show, I know.
No, I mean, the thing that I saw recently about it was like some like, everybody's body is like is different or something, which is, fine message, but like there was like a lot of naked nudity in like a gross style that I just, that's not for me.
Yeah, it is. I would like, it would have been on my anticipated list just because I'm a big fan of Nick Kroll, John Mulaney, right, and like that kind of like crew of people. But it's kind of like if like Family Guy or one of those kind of like raunchy it's not on a network, right? It's on Netflix.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
They can say fuck and they can show boobs. And it's not, it's not there to be, it's not like Game of Thrones where it's supposed to be like sexy or whatever, right? Like it's not supposed to be titillating. It's supposed to be like funny, because like the whole show revolves around kind of awkward, teenagers going through puberty and stuff in middle school and high school or whatever. But that show's insanely funny. I find it so funny and I laugh so hard, but it is also very like gross. And also like weirdly serialized and dramatic in some ways. I don't know. I had some real hardcore flashbacks to what it was like when I was in, like when I was in high school and having like high school fights with my high school friends or whatever. God, man, it all just seems so small in the rearview mirror, Mango, I say.
Yeah.
As a 28-year-old.
Yeah, like, I don't know, gross out humor is I just don't like it. Like I won't play Binding of Isaac because I just can't get over, like, there's too much.
Yeah. It is a show that I don't recommend to people, right? Based on like various things. I don't think it's a show for everybody. Yeah. I don't even think it's a show for me all that much. I think it's just because, you know what I mean? It's just because like, I love the Kroll show. It's a lot of the same people, right?
Right.
And so in a lot of ways it kind of like inherits that stuff. But there are definitely times where I'm just like, oh, gross. That's so gross.
Yeah, well, do we want to close this out with I don't know, like a game you're looking forward to, just because we are not.
So another game that I wanted to mention, completely out of left field, is the game called It's called, I think it's called HAL, which stands for Hard Ancient Living, which is an indie game city builder for ancient Egypt. And that's basically all that we know about it, but I love Banished so much, and I want to play more Banished, but not Banished, but also, yes, Banished. That the idea of playing a game where you are, managing an ancient Egyptian settlement, and in the same way that in Banished you're dealing with, like, the winter, right? Like, you are trying to survive winter and not get supremely fucked by that stuff. The idea of doing that, but with ancient Egypt, is very cool to me. So that was like an off the beaten path thing that I saw that I wanted to shout out.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And if you're gonna end it with an off the beaten path one, I'm gonna end it with one that's very on the beaten path, and I'm very hyped for Smash Brothers Ultimate.
Oh God.
I play a bunch of fighting games. I'm not very good at any of them. If I'm good at any of them, it's probably Smash. And I really like Smash. I'm just really excited for this iteration. Everything looks really cool. I don't know what else to say about it. It looks like it's going to be kind of like an ultimate version of the game. I'm actually kind of curious. Like, the thing I am most concerned about this game is not this game itself, but like what it means for the series going forward. Right? Like, I feel like this has to last for a while, because I don't know how you top this. Right? You can't, like, bring back every character, then add some more. My pet theory, is because Nintendo doesn't ever do anything straightforward or anything. Is it going to be kind of like their evergreen game? Like, a lot of these fighting games have decided that the current version is going to be the version for the foreseeable future, and they're going to just kind of keep adding content and seasons. And I could see Nintendo doing something like that, but I could also see them doing something stupid, like releasing new versions of it every couple of years, because they're like always perennially a generation behind in terms of like marketing tech, I guess is the right way to put it. It is, you've accused me of being a fanboy before, and I'll proudly wear that title. But like, if Nintendo's strength is in its game design, its weakness is in its like consumer experience. And so I'm a little bit worried on that front. But it's Smash. We're gonna have everybody that's been in every previous game on launch, so it can't be too bad, right?
Yeah, I kind of almost wonder if Smash Ultimate is built to be a long-lasting, that this is it, right? There are no future, every console will just get a copy of Smash Ultimate, right?
Yeah.
And they'll be releasing DLC or free DLC or whatever the case may be to add like new fighters in the same way that like League of Legends or something like that does.
Yeah, like I said, that's what Street Fighter does. That's what I think. What's the one for Xbox? I forget what it's called, but it's the one with like master. It doesn't have no. It has General RAM. Whatever it is. I obviously don't play it. Yeah. I could definitely see it going that way. But I think that's all we have to say about things that we are hyped about for the future. But what have you been hyped for this week, buddy? That you've been doing?
What have I been hyped for and doing this week?
I torture that sentence into recognizability.
So, have you been following any of like the kind of the drams and the backlash against Battle for Azeroth?
A little bit. Nerd Slayer just put out a post about why he's not playing Battle for Azeroth, which I watched. That reminded me to cancel my WoW subscription. Not that I know that it didn't really draw me in, but I wouldn't say I'm like vehemently against it like it seems some people are. Why don't you fill me in on the trends?
Yeah, this is something I find myself this is something I'm trying not to get sort of like, I don't know, angry or anything kind of like over. But yeah, like I feels like the initial reaction to World of Warcraft has been fairly negative. and so like the WoW subreddit every day is people just like shitting on it and everything, and there's a lot of pieces in there that are just like, why unsub? And then people are like, well, I did unsub, and it's like, okay, well, why are you talking about how bad the game is after you've unsubbed, kind of thing. And there's kind of like these like two warring pieces of it, because it seems as though the group of people that don't like the game have unsubbed, but are continuing to follow developments and post about how shitty those developments are, which I found intensely interesting as like a phenomenon, right? Because I feel like if I don't like a game, I stop following it. I don't want to see it anymore. I don't want to talk about it anymore, right? I want to get away from it, in a lot of ways. And so I'm interested by the idea that, like, you know, the World of Warcraft subreddit has been taken over by people that are keeping up with Wowhead and the MMO Champion and all the stuff that gets data mined or whatever, but aren't actually playing the game anymore because they think it's so bad. And I don't know what to do. I don't like. It's like I feel like it's a unique sort of thing. I mean, maybe part of me suspects that the truth of it all is that they haven't unsubbed, right? And that they are still playing the game and they are just as frustrated as before, but are addicted to it to whatever extent that they are, and so they continue along with the kind of like the pattern and the path. I don't know.
I mean, I also think there's an aspect to this where, like, I think people are kind of used to unsubbing and resubbing to WoW, in kind of like like, it's, how do I want to put this? I feel like people feel like they're still part of the game and part of the community, even during the times where they're unsubbed, right? Like, this is a game. It's not a game that, like, when you unsub, you leave. When you unsub, you're just kind of like taking a break for a while, and eventually you expect to come back. And I think that, you know, while that's a little bit weird, I also don't think that that's so unexpected or so bad, right? Like, I think that makes sense for a lot of people, right? That you would want to, you'd want to make sure that the game eventually gets to a state where you want to play it again, because you do want to play this game that you've been playing on and off for 12 years. You just want it to be in a state where it's worth it to you to pay the $15 a month. So we kind of get the attitude there. Yeah, do you want to bring up any of the specific complaints and whether you think they're valid?
Yeah,
or not,
okay,
or...
so I am going to talk about spoilers, I guess, like, because I want to talk about some of the specific sorts of things, but I do want to warn people that some of this is going to include spoilers that have been data mined off of the 8.1 PTR, and if you haven't spoiled yourself for any of that kind of stuff, thanks for listening. Okay, so 3, 2, 1 spoilers. Okay. In 8.1, so a lot of this revolves around two kinds of things. One is factionalization in like the true tribal version of, I think a lot of players are factionally kind of motivated and allied as people, right? As players, right. Which is a different relationship than I have to the like my relationship to the factions as an RPer is as a window to others in a way, right? I am interested in Sylvanas from the perspective of a Forsaken, right, who looks on her as an ill-tempered and cynical but pragmatic savior, right? And that she gets and that she's doing what has to be done or something like that. Or I like looking at Sylvanas from as, an orc like a second war, a veteran of the Second War orc who, went through this kind of mania before with the original Horde and is sad to see the Horde fall to the same kind. You know what I mean? Like all of these details are always kind of like filtered through the worldview of like a character in a true like role playing sense, right?
Right.
But I think for the majority of the player base, that's not the case, right? They, as people, look at Sylvanas and they say, she is a bad guy. Or they look at Sylvanas and they say, she is a good guy. Or they look at Sylvanas and they say, she's a complicated person who does complicated, like whatever the gamut of things are. But the point is that they all hold, like, personal opinions and beliefs about this character, and also the character of Anduin, and also the character of Sourfang and the Horde and the Alliance and the whole kind of like conflict in general, right? But the problem is that if you have a story about that is Battle for Azeroth, right? and it is about like the Horde and the Alliance like really coming to true blows, kind of against one another. If you have people that are going to be factionalized that way, I feel like it kind of naturally breeds this kind of thought and like negativity in a way, right? Because like there is no, I mean, we all know that N'Zoth is like the big bad, but there's nobody that like, it's not like Wrath of the Lich King where the factionalized stuff is in there, right? If you don't like Sylvanas or Putris or whatever the like the alchemist's name is or whatever, if you're not like Varian, you think like Varian is a jerk or whatever, that is all secondary to the ultimate goal of defeating the Lich King, right? Or in the same way, like I recently played through the Alliance version of the Stormheim opening, which is, to be honest with you, one of the most formative pieces of factionalized lore that has been forgotten, because the Alliance literally starts the war against the Legion with an assassination plot against Sylvanas. And, like, that's it. It's just, it is plain as day that they are going to go assassinate Sylvanas in Stormheim. They are the absolute aggressors who are trying to remove, who are trying to remove her from power or whatever. But that is a smaller piece of a story versus the story about Sargeras and the Burning Legion and all of this other kind of stuff, right? And to a certain extent, I think that it's a core piece of the story because it is one that helps to explain context. Like Battle for Azeroth feels like it comes out of nowhere unless you think of this Stormheim stuff, right. Where Sylvanas literally gets proof that the Alliance wants her dead, and that they are not going to sit around and kind of like negotiate or whatever. Anyway, and so part of me wonders, my whole kind of thesis with this is like, okay, well, if your players are personally invested in the made-up story of Azeroth, right? They are personally invested in Sylvanas is a villain, right? Or Sylvanas is, an anti-hero, or whatever their opinion is, right? You are always going to piss people off when you have an entire expansion based around pitting these people against one another. And there's no way around it. And so so my grand thesis to the negativity is that, yes, it is not, some of it is justified, but a lot of it is not. A lot of it is just ambient frustration because WoW is forcing people to hate one another and the story because of their own kind of like prior biases walking into it. And I have no idea I don't know if that's a good thing or that's a bad thing. I just think it is like the thing that is happening. And so I just wanted to talk about that, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, right? Like I definitely see that, right? Like and I think that Blizzard plays into it, right? Like if you remember the advertising for Battle for Azeroth, it was like a dude on a train who like goes to like sit down next to some girl, and then he sees the Alliance insignia on her bag, and he's like, I'm not sitting next to her, I'm going to sit next to the big guy on the other side of the train, and I'm going to proudly flash my Horde symbol, right? Like, yeah, I think I think they actively encourage that, and I think I agree with you. I don't know if I have an opinion on whether or not that's.
Yeah, I have no idea whether or not it's a mistake, but because we keep getting like in my guild and stuff like that, we keep getting into these arguments, but the arguments always boil down to what is your fundamental set of beliefs about like the WoW universe as a person, right? So the 8.1 stuff that comes out is that like 8.1 is like the Alliance's revenge, right? The Horde is make the big first hits. They burn down Teldrassil. They push the Alliance off of Kalimdor. Even if they lose the Siege of Lordaeron gets blighted by Sylvanas, so they don't even like gain all that much in terms of like power or territory or whatever. And so Tyrande and the Alliance mount a like they go back to Darkshore, and they are fighting against the Forsaken occupation of Darkshore, right? What Sylvanas is doing on Darkshore is raising all of these rangers who have died, all of these sentinels, like the Night Elf sentinels, to be her new Dark Rangers. So they're like undead elves or whatever. And the kind of crucial piece of this is that two named characters on the Night Elf side Delarin, who is in Sylvanas' cinematic, she's like the one with all of like the arrows in her back, and she's like dying, and she's like the captain of the defense, and she loses, and she's like, you can't kill Hope, and Sylvanas is like, can't I? Then she dies. She gets rezzed as a Dark Ranger, and also another character that pops up in the in like the Night Elf stuff with Tyrande, her name is Syrah, and she's like a warden. She also dies and gets rezzed by Sylvanas, and they immediately turn on, and start fighting Tyrande. Now, if you are somebody who comes at this from a point of view of...
Wait, it's just real quick. Do they turn on... They are loyal to Sylvanas?
They are loyal to Sylvanas, right.
Okay, yeah. I just want to make sure I got that.
And this is a point, and I think there are two sides to this coin, right? And one of them is kind of like, are you sympathetic to the Night Elves, or are you sympathetic to the Forsaken, right? Because if you're sympathetic to the Forsaken, this has always been true, right? Forsaken, like the early Forsaken quests in Death Now, both in vanilla and the updated version of the quest in Cataclysm, are about humans who are members of the Alliance, presumably, who are raised to be Forsaken, and they essentially get a choice to join the Horde, and the vast majority of them choose, yep, I am Forsaken, I am joining Sylvanas, I am part of the Horde now, right? Additionally, there are other quests throughout like that whole side of things where you are going and you are killing humans and raising them against their allies, right? So, for instance, there's a quest in Silver Pine Forest where you go to Fenris Isle. It's like this island. There's a bunch of humans. There's a bunch of Alliance humans that are holding out there. And you run around with a Valkyr. You kill the humans. The Valkyr raises the humans as Forsaken. The Forsaken then join your attack, right? So if you are a Forsaken, if you're a Forsaken sympathizer, your argument is this has always been true, right? Death is a traumatic experience. You, when you are Forsaken, you are truly, you are Forsaken. You will never be accepted by your people again. And so the only thing that makes sense is to join up with Sylvanas, right? And typically also, right, like your, whatever negative kind of anxieties or insecurities or feelings are then projected out against people, right? And in the 8.1 stuff, when the Night Elves are fighting against their like undead former brethren, those undead former brethren are being, like they are really going after the Night Elves, and they're saying, Delarin says, where was Elune, like your Elune's vengeance, where was Elune when her people were being slaughtered, right? You abandoned us. This is your fault, kind of, right? Like that sort of like trauma, right? But if you're a Night Elf, you look at that and you say, these are people who for 10,000 years have been defending Kalimdor, right? And as soon as they died, they literally died defending these people. And as soon as they are res, they immediately turn against Tyrande. That's bullshit, kind of thing. But it all just boils down to kind of like which of those priors you hold. Like which one of these groups is willing to get your benefit of the doubt, essentially.
Yeah. No, I see that. I actually think that this has always kind of been a problem for the undead. Like, I think that you can put off this problem for a long time if you're never doing anything that like really puts yourself face to face with it. Like if it's all like faceless NPC, like faceless humans doing it. But I think that kind of like the twin narratives of like the undead, like you said, like the undead are like a real faction that are not like completely evil and disgusting. Whereas like the other side of that being that like, there seems to be some amount of potential for like an undead to or like for somebody to be like do the like, if this was a story where the Alliance were the good guys and the Horde were the bad guys definitively, the noble thing to do would be to like reject your undeath, or like turn around and immediately start fighting them because you've been rezzed against your will or whatever.
That is by the way something that happens in the Cataclysm starting zone quests. You meet 3 different people, one of whom immediately commits suicide because he doesn't want to live in undeath, right? Another one wants to stay alive but doesn't join the Forsaken and leaves. And then the third one joins up with the Forsaken and is like, "Yep, I'm cool with this." And so a lot of people are saying that there's mind control going on. That Sylvanas is mind controlling these Night Elves against their will, and that's what secretly, like that's the secret, that nobody would follow to Sylvanas willingly, that they're all mind controlled, which I think that particularly that is a poor argument, kind of like based in nothing. I kind of default to the Forsaken side of things just because it's the one that's like based in lore, right? Like if you take a long view of lore and see how does Sylvanas act, how do the Forsaken act or whatever, right? This is very in keeping with that stuff, and I don't think it's that kind of crazy, but it is like a huge sticking point for people. Also, the sticking point of Tyrande Whisperwind, this super powerful high priest of Elune or whatever, can't kill Nathanos Blightcaller. Like, she's trying to kill Nathanos, and Nathanos doesn't die. That is another huge sticking point for people. But I think that that's rooted just in the fact that the Alliance characters are typically overpowered, and you need these characters to be on equal footing as the Horde characters, and that's kind of the fault of bad story writing that elevates people, right? In the sense of like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have made Malfurion just like the single most powerful druid of all time forever, no matter what, and that's the problem here, not the fact that Tyrande and Malfurion get beaten by Nathanos and a bunch of Forsaken.
Yeah. I just to kind of rewind back to the previous point a little bit. I think I think that, like, not that, like, I think that you're wrong that the what's it called, that by lore standards the Forsaken storyline isn't right. I just think that it's a weird sticking point in the writing, in the lore, that like kind of would rub people the wrong way anyway. Yeah. Right? That, like, in a noble bright universe, that like 90% of the people that are raised as undead choose to portray their former people, which is, in a lot of ways, like, colored as an evil act, right? Like that's like, or like, in a lot of literature, doing something like that would be an evil thing, right? Like that's a thing you do to pursue power above your morals. And I think that it's just like such a weird sticking point that, like I said, has been kind of shoved to the side because it's never been anybody that really mattered, right? Like you can easily see that, like, you can easily, like, in your mind say, well, Joe Schmo did it, but like, if you went and killed Malfurion and Sylvanas raised him, right? Like, I feel like there's no good answer to what he does, right? Like, I feel like that's maybe why they don't do it, right? Like ever, right? Like, Sylvanas, I think you get because you can do it once, right? And have it kind of work out. Like, Sylvanas' story is also unique and like goes for a while, right? Like, she's not initially as like herself when she first becomes a banshee under Arthas, right? And Arthas does have a measure of mind control, correct?
Yes. When Arthas raises people, he is mind controlling them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I think that this is a problem that's long been brewing. It's finally, like, just not a problem in that there isn't an answer, just like, I think, like, a weird writing point that I think would have always bothered people if it had ever been brought to light in this kind of way.
Yeah, I especially think it's weird just because it is quite literally theoretical ethics, right? These are not real ethics because we can't raise people from the dead. And so, like, I actually kind of think that there is something to be said for, like, what do you consider mind control in a way? Yeah. Because, like, so for instance, when the Forsaken are described, they are described in a way that, like, their undeath makes them angry and bitter, right? In a way that is not sort of like natural, or if like it is like it is a state of their undeath that they are bitter and angry and sour, right, and just like shitty people to a certain extent. And I think viewed from that lens, it also sort of makes sense in the sense that, like, maybe like being raised in undeath hyper charges these kind of negative emotions, and so someone is more willing to invest in their abandonment issues by Tyrande and the failure they feel that their goddess didn't answer their prayers, right, versus Sylvanas or kind of like whoever else kind of thing. I I don't know. I think it's. I think the Forsaken are not a super popular race to empathize with, just because that they are, kind of like they are edgy and villainous and anti-hero-y in a lot of ways, and so their voice kind of gets drowned out by the people who play the Alliance, and they play Night Elves or whatever, and they react to the very visceral genocide, right, that happened in Teldrassil, obviously. And are kind of like speaking sort of like from that place than from anywhere else. In a lot of ways, I'm actually very interested by the kind of like raising of different characters that's going on in like the quest lines of the war campaign, right? It's kind of neat to see some of this stuff like play out over time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really surprised they didn't go with the standard kind of like, they're not the person you knew type of thing, where like the like the underlying personality is kind of very sublimated, and it's like an almost new personality. And
yeah, there is some. I think if you talk, like their default text, like quote text or whatever, is something like, it's like, we all have our reasons or something for like joining the Dark Lady or whatever it is, kind of thing, which seems to suggest that idea in a certain sort of way.
Yeah, like, I don't know. It also, I think, would be less weird if like Sylvanas had like a terrible conversion rate, right? Like, out of every 100 people she raised, only 10 never joined up or something.
Yeah.
But it feels like it's much more in the other direction, that most people end up joining up, because I don't think that the numbers work out otherwise. Really, like the kind of the motivations work out otherwise.
Yeah. I super feel that.
But yeah, on my side, I've been playing like last week. I was playing, or it was the week before, I forget. I've been playing an open world game with towers that you unlock collectibles with. That's Spider-Man this time around. Spider-Man is a lot of fun. Swinging is incredibly fun. I highly recommend it if you like the Spider-Man. It's a, like, I haven't gotten too deep into the story, but like, it's a really neat story. I have heard other people who are more familiar with it saying it's probably the best piece of Spider-Man storytelling outside of the comic books ever. Like, it's better than any of the movies have ever been.
Oh boy, that's a tall order. Spider-Man 2 is so fucking good, but I think I am I am bullish on Spider-Man 2's quality, probably.
Fair enough. But it is really neat. At least the stuff I've seen so far. And it's well done. It's also a different take on Spider-Man. I think it's like Spider-Man's been the Spider-Man for 8 years in the setting of the game. So it's not like it's most of the movies have been like relatively close to his origin.
Right. Yeah, that's actually very cool.
Yeah. So they've got like it's got a little bit of history. Not everything's there, right? Because he's working for Otto Octavius, and I don't think he's become Doc Ock yet.
Okay.
They're like kind of like working on that technology, but like he dated MJ for a while, and then they broke up. And right now you're like the story enters like 6 months after they've broken up, and she's a reporter, and they're talking. They are just talking for the first time after that breakup in like the beginning of the story. And so there's a bunch of cool stuff there. Though, like, it's got like it is very much a typical open world game. There's a lot of collectible stuff. The only thing that really like strikes me as being like super silly is at one point you open up a bunch of Oscorp research stations that were set up by Harry to kind of like further his mother's wishes, and like past her death, and what happens. And so you go to them, and this is how you get like basically everything you do gives you a token which lets you unlock new stuff. They do this really well too. With a lot of the things you unlock are like new suits, and so you get like a new look for your character. And they've got a bunch of stuff. They've got like the steampunky looking suit. Spider-Man Noir is what it's called. They've got the punk rocker suit. They've got the wrestling suit. They've got the Scarlet Spider suit. They've got a couple different Stark suits. It's really cool in that way. Also, the new suit for the game looks really nice. But on this Norman Osborn thing, not Norman, Harry. You go and like you can do them at your leisure, right? And every time you go to one, you like walk inside, and it just so happens that there's a crisis that this center can deal with happening right now, and it just like feel like everything else feels all right. Like nothing, like there are backpacks that a younger Spider-Man had left around as like stashes that you're retrieving, or like you're taking pictures of famous landmarks in New York City. Some of them real, some of them fictional. Like you take a picture of the Avengers Tower, or the Wakandan embassy, and so that all feels really natural. But like the everything besides the Osborn stuff feels really good, and the Osborn stuff's still fun. It's just like it's just this weird break because it does this thing that like all games do, where it's like you need to get downtown now, and then you're like, but I want to go do this instead. And it's like nothing ever matters in that way. Like you don't have to go do anything. And where it really is some missions take place at certain times of day in the city, and so it'll stop it'll send you to a loading screen and then load you to like the next night, and then when you're done, it'll load you back to the day if you're doing it in the middle of the day. It's like and that break-in that was just reported to you by Yuri Watanabe is still, I guess, ongoing. 24 hours later. But that stuff aside, which you can easily it's not that bad. Games, really fun. I would characterize those complaints as nitpicks, to use your parlance. The other thing I've been playing a lot of is I've been playing a lot of Black Ops 4.
Oh shit! Yeah, tell me about Black Ops 4 because I've seen that a lot of people are playing it, and I'm interested because I feel like Call of Duty games typically don't get this kind of action.
Yeah. I buy a Call of Duty game every couple of years, usually on a console, just have some dumb running gun fun because I like that kind of thing. And Blackout, which is the battle royale mode, is very good. It is basically like a very smooth PUBG in terms of feel. Right? It doesn't feel as cartoony or as weird as Fortnite does. It's not as tactical as PUBG. It's a little bit more running gun, but it's still is very good. The shooting feels really good. COD shooting always feels pretty decent. There's a couple cool spins on it. Like there are helicopters. There are like zombie spawn points that you can get some unique gear out of. There are missions which I haven't interacted with yet, but like pick up a piece of paper and it tells you things you need to do, and if you do it, you unlock a character skin to play in Blackout mode, which seems really cool. Just very typical. But otherwise, it plays like PUBG on like Sandhawk in terms of map size. It's not perfect. I don't think it's a full replacement for PUBG, but it's definitely a lot of fun. It's definitely a lot more approachable too. It definitely doesn't have like a lot of the jankiness that PUBG definitely has. And I personally kind of want to see. It's not possible for me to do, but I would have liked to have seen how I felt about this game coming into it, having never played PUBG, much less having played 400 hours of it.
Right.
I think, yeah. I find myself being not as kind of crazily enthused by it, but that might just be kind of like general fatigue of the type since I've been playing PUBG for so long. Things don't seem to be as tense towards the end, and again, I can't tell if that's me or if it's just kind of like something that's fundamentally different about the game. I'll let you know if I figure that out. The other part of that is there's multiplayer and zombies. I'm not a big fan of zombies. I'm just not a fan of horde shooters. In general, I try and it just doesn't really usually pan out for me. But I've been playing a bunch of the multiplayer, and it's classic Call of Duty running gun fun. I'm not very good, but I'm having a lot of fun. It's kind of really nailed that the progression thing, where your guns level up, you level up, and there's always something more to be pushing towards. And to be working on, and that kind of thing really feels good. And you've got a lot of customization available, and so it's just good fun. You've got your guns and your class, and you've also got an operator which has they've done this thing where they've kind of taken pieces that have all the best kind of things from the genre. Like there's a little bit of hero shooter elements that you pick a character that gets a piece of gear and an ultimate ability, and they're all kind of differently balanced against each other. And you can override the gear piece with your class if you want. And you also get a lot of the evolutions on like the healing. Instead of healing instantly, instead of healing like you do normally in previously in COD games, where you wait a little while and it heals back up automatically. You have a heal, like a basically a healing vial on a cooldown, and when you use it, you heal up to full in much the same way as you did in the previous COD. But there's a little bit of time between when you can do that back to back. So it still has a lot of that same COD feel, but it's also if you're constantly getting to engagements, you can't just disengage for a couple of seconds multiple times. You only do that like once or twice. But it's a ton of fun, right? Like I'm like I've been playing it with friends of the cast, Nick, Monica, and X, all day today. And it's been great.
Are you gonna go back to it after this?
Probably.
Yeah.
Like while we were recording, Monica asked me if I was done yet. So yeah, that's been my week really.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, actually. Makes me want to play.
Yeah.
But,
I mean,
it's always tough with games like this because it's like $60, and I guess I got it out of PUBG, like over time or whatever. But I do look at, Vermintide 2, which I played for 4 hours, a little bit like side-eyed.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you.
But I guess that's the long and the short of it.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
I don't think I have anything else. But if you guys at home want to tell us what you think of any of the things we talked about that we're hype about, any of the things that we talked about that we're playing right now, you can email us at podcast@somederpsplaygames.com or somederpsplaygames@gmail.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/somederpsplaygames. Although we haven't done anything in a while, maybe soon. And what else? You can follow us on YouTube. I've been posting these casts to YouTube. If you'd prefer this in video form, with like a waveform of the audio plastered over it. And you should rate and review us on iTunes. Give us ratings, because that's the thing that apparently helps us. Even if you don't listen to this through iTunes, most podcast players like source their stuff, like source their rankings through iTunes. So do that, please. I think that's everything I had. Buddy, do you have anything else you want to promote?
I have nothing else that I'm looking to promote.
In that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.